They teach you to shoot where the enemy is. But I say, aim for the half-second where they think they are safe. That's where the math lives. The morning sky over the Rhine was a blur of silver and smoke. It was February 1945, the last desperate gasp of the Luftwaffe, and the 357th Fighter Group had orders to sweep and clear the air ahead of the heavy bomber stream. 12 P-51 Mustangs roared through a sky shredded by flak bursts. Among them flew Lieutenant Vance in Lucky Charm. His gunner, Staff Sergeant Caleb Hawk Stirling. Vance called him the strangest gunner I've ever met. Stirling wasn't loud like the others. He didn't gamble or brag in the mess hall. He just sat quietly in his bunk with a battered notebook, scribbling lines, numbers, and strange geometric angles. When asked what it was, he'd simply say, "Math. I'm trying to teach a bullet how to fly." That morning, they were deep over Germany, escorting the bombers near the Rhine. Clouds drifted low, creating a perfect sniper's sky. From above, the radio crackled fiercely. "Bandits, 9 o'clock high." Out of the haze came 6 FW 192nds, slicing through the formation. The first German fighter opened fire, 20mm shells exploding dangerously past the lead Mustang. Pilots immediately broke formation, twisting into a chaotic dogfight that turned the horizon into a violent kaleidoscope. Vance cursed loudly. "They've got altitude. We're sitting ducks." In the cramped back seat, Stirling scanned the air, his eyes cold, deliberate. "Not if you let me take the long shot," he said, his voice level. Vance laughed, a strained, desperate sound. "We're a mile out, Hawk. You can't hit that far. You'll just scare him." Stirling didn't answer. He was already adjusting his position. The Mustang banked slightly, lining up a target. 1 FW 190 banking right. Now a small dot 2,000 yards out. A tiny flash of sunlight glinted on its wingtip. Stirling noted the drift, the airspeed, the precise angle. He whispered to himself, "At 350 knots, he'll cross at 5 degrees. Drop 7 inches at this range." He exhaled slowly. 3 short bursts. The tracers arced like glowing threads of light. 2 missed their mark. The third struck precisely just behind the German cockpit. The FW 190 shuddered violently, rolled hard, and broke apart, scattering pieces across the clear blue sky. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Vance blinked, his headset suddenly quiet. "What the hell, you hit him?" Stirling didn't even look up. "You don't hit planes, Lieutenant. You hit where they'll be when they think they're safe." The squadron's radios erupted in shock. "Who just nailed that crowd at a mile out? Was that Stirling, Jesus Christ?" "That was impossible." Vance chuckled, half in disbelief, half in awe. "You're out of your damn mind, Hawk." Stirling smiled faintly. "Maybe, but math doesn't lie." When they landed, mechanics counted the spent shells. Only 12 rounds fired, 1 confirmed kill. Range 2,200 yards. The others called it luck. Stirling called it a proof of concept. That night he returned to his bunk, opened his battered notebook, and began writing down new variables. Air density, bullet weight, deflection time. Across the top of the page he scrolled a title, "Equation for Flight at 400 miles per hour." He wasn't just firing guns anymore. He was rewriting how the sky worked. For decades, every fighter pilot and aerial gunner had been taught the same immutable truth. The sky was chaos. Dogfights weren't about calculated aim. They were about raw instinct. You fired in long bursts, swept your tracers across where you hoped the enemy would be, and prayed 1 or 2 rounds found their mark before they found you. The Army Air Force's manual put it bluntly. At 300 yards, continuous fire is recommended. Precision aiming is impossible in dynamic flight. Aerial gunnery wasn't sniping. It was a deadly game of statistics. The average burst lasted 2.5 seconds and spat out 300 rounds. A single P-51 could expend its entire ammunition load in less than a minute of continuous fire and still miss every single target. The logic was simple. Speed made calculation useless. Aerial combat happened at hundreds of miles per hour. Both aircraft moving, climbing, rolling, pitching, and twisting. The angles changed faster than a man could blink. Pilots were told to rely on reflexes, not reason. Stirling read those same manuals, and they made his blood boil. He had spent 3 years on the ground as a highly trained sniper, where one mistake, one fraction of a degree, meant death. He'd learned to feel the wind on his cheek, to measure a heartbeat before a trigger break. He knew the world didn't run on chaos. It ran on physics. And physics, he believed, didn't stop working just because you left the ground. He began experimenting with his gun sights. On training flights, while other gunners fired short bursts at drifting targets, Stirling would sit motionless, studying the parallax movement of clouds and the wobble of the gun sight reticle as the plane banked. He realized something others hadn't noticed, that at constant throttle, a P-51's nose drifted in perfect, predictable arcs. Those arcs, he realized, could be measured, and if they could be measured, they could be solved. He started recording data on every flight: altitude, wind shear, roll speed, burst delay, even the minute lag between trigger press and bullet departure. When his crewmates teased him, he just smiled. "I'm learning where the sky bends," he'd say. At first, his results were mocked. Instructors told him he was wasting time. That combat was pure instinct. But one day, during a mock dogfight, he predicted exactly where a target drone would cross the sun's glare and nailed it in a single burst from 800 yards. His commanding officer radioed, "You're supposed to miss the first 5, Stirling's calm reply. "Only if you aim where he is." From then on, men started watching him differently. The laughter turned to curiosity. Mechanics began helping him record his sight adjustments. Pilots started asking him to check their convergence settings. In an army that worshipped manuals, Stirling had broken the first commandment: don't think too much. He wasn't just shooting anymore, he was predicting. Each calculation, each line of numbers, brought him closer to a dangerous idea: that precision could exist even inside chaos. One pilot muttered, "You can't aim in the sky." Stirling smirked. "That's what they said about hitting moving targets on the ground. Until we did." He looked out the window of the hangar that night. The P-51 seconds, glinting under floodlights. To him, they weren't planes. They were rifles with wings, and he was about to teach them how to aim. Before he ever touched an aircraft, Caleb Hawk Stirling had learned everything he needed to know about patience, wind, and death from the dry fields of central Texas. Born in 1919 outside Abilene, he grew up herding cattle, shooting coyotes, and fixing rifles that other men swore were done for. His father once said, "That boy doesn't aim, he calculates." By 19, Stirling had joined the U.S. Army as a marksman in the 36th Infantry Division. When the war broke out, he shipped off to North Africa with a Springfield rifle and the quiet confidence of a man who understood distance better than most people understood conversation. His commanders quickly realized his uncanny gift. He could hit moving targets through dust, wind, or darkness. In Tunisia, he earned his nickname. A German officer was crossing a ridge at 800 yards when Stirling fired. The bullet struck so fast the man's cap didn't fall until 3 seconds later. A squad mate whispered, "He sees like a hawk." The name stuck. But war doesn't care about skill. During the push into Italy, shrapnel tore through his knee during an artillery barrage. His sniper days were over. The medics called him lucky. He didn't feel lucky. He felt caged. He refused evacuation. When asked what else he could do, he said, "If it moves, I can still hit it." That line got him transferred to the Army Air Forces. He was retrained as an aerial gunner, one of the countless men responsible for manning twin Brownings in the bellies, tails, and noses of bombers and fighters. It was supposed to be routine, but Stirling didn't see it that way. When others memorized burst lengths and spray patterns, he carried a battered notebook filled with diagrams, arcs of flight, wind drift tables, and ballistic conversions between air density and bullet drop. His instructors laughed. "Kid, you're not on the range anymore. You can't play math teacher in a 400 miles per hour dogfight." Stirling had only nodded. Physics doesn't care what uniform you wear. At gunnery school in Florida, they tested his reaction time, aim, and pattern spread. His first score came back as a misprint. 240 out of 250 on moving aerial targets. The instructors reran it twice. He matched it every time. The range officer muttered, "You don't aim like a pilot. You aim like you know the bullet's already there." When he finally shipped out to England, assigned to the 357th Fighter Group as a technical gunner, he wasn't the kind of man anyone expected to change history. He was quiet, scarred, and had a limp that made climbing into a Mustang cockpit painful. But once he settled in, he did what he'd always done: observe, measure, and learn. He started asking the pilots questions that made them uncomfortable. How do you account for relative airspeed and deflection? Do you compensate for bullet deceleration at altitude? Do you even know your bullet's time to target? They'd laugh, slap his shoulder, and say, "We don't think about it, Hawk. We just shoot." He'd smile back. But every night, he'd rewrite his equations. He wasn't satisfied with almost right. The others had instinct. He had numbers. And he knew the day would come when math would save them all. By spring 1944, Stirling's notebook had stopped looking like notes. It looked like a manifesto. Lines of numbers, quick sketches of turning circles, muzzle velocities, even wind correction factors for altitudes above 20,000 feet. It was the kind of obsessive data that only one man in the squadron cared about, and most called madness. But Stirling wasn't guessing. He was translating the chaos of the sky into something measurable. He'd noticed a strange pattern during training flights. When a P-51 rolled into a left turn, its rounds tended to fall just below target if fired within the first 2 seconds of deflection. But in a right-hand turn, they overshot by several feet. Pilots blamed it on air drift. Stirling realized it was gyroscopic precession. The spin of the Mustang's massive propeller was actually pulling the nose upward in one direction and downward in the other. He wrote, "Guns don't miss. They obey physics. The pilot just doesn't." Every flight became an experiment. He'd adjust his timing by milliseconds, predicting how the target's velocity would intersect with his firing arc, factoring both aircraft's roll rates and gravitational drop. Where others fired 200 rounds in a panic, Stirling fired 10 and watched every tracer find its mark. One morning, during a test patrol near the Channel, he asked his pilot, Lieutenant Vance, to maintain a steady throttle at 2,800 revolutions per minute. "Why?" Vance asked. "I'm calibrating the sky." They laughed until Stirling hit a target drone from over 900 yards with a 2-second burst. Vance radioed the control tower. "Put that one in the record book." Word spread fast across the 357th. Some called him the airborne sniper. Others joked that he'd made a deal with the devil. But one engineer from the ground crew didn't laugh. He studied Stirling's notes and realized what he was seeing: a rough mathematical model for predictive aerial targeting. At the time, no Allied squadron had anything like it. The Germans were experimenting with mechanical lead computing gun sights like the EZ-42. But the Americans relied purely on pilot instinct. Stirling, without even knowing it, was bridging that gap, building his own mental computer. In one entry, he scribbled, "Every fight begins with chaos. End it before it becomes random." His data began to attract attention. Intelligence officers copied parts of his notebook to send to Wright Field in Ohio for evaluation. The report came back stamped, "Impractical in combat conditions." Stirling just smiled. That's what they said about snipers in 1914. Then came his breakthrough. He realized that by syncing the trigger timing with the propeller's RPM oscillation, he could reduce recoil vibration just enough to tighten grouping at long range by nearly 20%. He dubbed it harmonic shooting. Vance thought it was insane. You're timing your bursts with the damn engine. If the plane breathes, why shouldn't the gunfire breathe with it? And in that one line, part poetry, part science, Stirling described the future of aerial gunnery. The mechanics who once mocked him started helping. They adjusted mounts, aligned barrels, and filed off microburrs on the gun ports. Together, they turned Lucky Charm into something unique. A fighter whose guns sang in rhythm with its engine. The first time Stirling fired in combat with the new setup, his bursts cut through a Messerschmitt at nearly half a mile. The German pilot never even saw the tracers. That night, over cigarettes in the hangar, Vance said, "You just turned math into murder." Stirling nodded quietly. "No, I turned it into survival." April 8th, 1944. Mission 226. The 357th Fighter Group was escorting B-17 seconds bound for the industrial heart of Germany, near Bremen. Heavy flak, freezing air, and the kind of light that made men believe in God or ghosts. At 25,000 feet, the bombers were already taking hits, black puffs bursting around their formation, each one a deadly blossom of steel. Above them, the Mustangs weaved and climbed, the silent guardians of the flying fortresses. In one of those Mustangs sat Lieutenant Vance. Behind him, in the cramped rear fuselage, was Stirling, scanning the horizon through his modified K-14 gun sight. His fingers rested on the twin triggers. His notes, scribbled equations and angles were taped beside the gun mount. The radio crackled. Bandits, 11 o'clock high, 20 plus. Messerschmitts, Focke-Wulfs, 20 German fighters diving like hawks toward the lumbering bombers below. Vance banked hard left, engine roaring. Stirling didn't flinch. His pencil was gone, but his mind still calculated. Airspeed 320 knots. Closure rate nearly 700 miles per hour. Deflection 22 degrees starboard. Wind shear negligible. He didn't see chaos. He saw a pattern. 3 FW 190 seconds broke formation, coming straight for them. Vance shouted, "We can't take 3. Hang on." But Stirling cut him off. "Hold steady. Don't turn yet." The lead German rolled, cannon flashes blinking like fireflies. Stirling waited a full half-second longer than any normal gunner would. Then he fired. A 2-second burst, 12 rounds. At that speed, each a .50 caliber bullet crossed the gap in just over a quarter second, and every single one struck true. The lead Focke-Wulf exploded mid-turn, its fuselage splitting before the wings tore away. The others scattered violently. Vance stared, stunned. "Jesus, Hawk, how'd you—" Stirling reloaded calmly. "Simple." He forgot the sky curves. Then came more. 5, 6, 10 Luftwaffe fighters swirling in like vultures. For 30 seconds, it was a ballet of death. The bombers below wavered, engines bleeding smoke. Stirling shouted, "Climb now!" Vance slammed the throttle forward, the Merlin engine screaming. The Mustang clawed for altitude, and Stirling tracked one more target, a Bf 109 closing fast from below. He aimed not at the plane, but where it would be a half-second into the future, factoring in its climb rate and the Mustang's roll vector. He fired just once, 3 rounds. The Messerschmitt flew straight into them. At 25,000 feet, the German exploded into flame. The air crackled with radio chatter. "What the hell was that shot?" someone shouted. "That's impossible." Stirling's response was calm, dry, Texan. "Not if you do the math." They made it home that night. The debrief officer thought the claims were exaggerated. 2 confirmed kills. Maybe 3. Vance insisted on 5. Stirling just smiled and tore another page from his notebook. What no one knew yet was that Stirling's sky math had done something unprecedented. His lead calculations had reduced the average burst requirement by 80%, meaning he could destroy a plane with 1/10 the ammo most gunners used. In a war built on mass production, he had created precision. The next day, his squadron leader ordered him to document his method. Stirling refused. "Sir, it's not a method. It's a feeling you earn from the math." but word spread beyond their hangar. A colonel from Air Tactical Command arrived within a week, requesting to observe this so-called sniper pilot. Vance leaned over and whispered to Stirling, "They're either going to promote you or lock you up." Stirling just grinned. "Guess we'll find out who fears numbers more, the Germans or our own brass." The following week, the 357th was ordered to fly a live demonstration before Tactical Command observers at Lakenheath Airfield. For the brass, it was a formality, a training review to evaluate field marksmanship. For Stirling, it was the chance to prove that instinct and numbers could coexist in the chaos of war. The sky was bright, cold, and silent as he climbed into the belly of Lucky Charm. A cluster of officers, engineers, intelligence analysts, and even a few skeptical pilots stood on the tarmac below. Among them was Colonel Harris, a man with the kind of posture that made the air itself straighten up. "Let's see this miracle math in action," he said dryly. Stirling didn't reply. He just nodded, checked the harmonics between the Merlin engine's RPM and his Browning's trigger sync, and muttered under his breath, "Let's dance." The target was a drone painted Luftwaffe gray, flown remotely from the tower, simulating a diving FW-190. It screamed in from altitude, twisting through the sun glare at 350 miles per hour. Most gunners fired in wide bursts at that angle, wasting ammo, hoping for a lucky hit. Stirling waited 10 seconds. 12. He tracked the arc of the dive, not with his eyes, but with his mind, mapping the future path. Then, one short burst. Every round struck. The drone disintegrated before it even leveled out. The observers froze. One technician's mouth hung open. Colonel Harris looked up at the smoking debris, then down at Stirling's cockpit. "That wasn't luck." Stirling's reply came through the radio. "Sir, math doesn't gamble." A second drone launched, then a third. Stirling shot them both down within seconds, each with fewer than 15 rounds. It wasn't gunfire anymore. It was geometry. When he landed, Harris met him on the runway. "Sergeant Stirling, your results border on the impossible. These calculations you claim to use, where are they documented?" Stirling pointed to his head. "Right here, sir." Harris frowned. "We need them on paper. Our analysts want to replicate your method." Stirling hesitated, then said quietly, "If they don't understand what it feels like when you fire, they won't get it right. It's not just numbers. It's rhythm. It's heartbeat timing." That answer didn't sit well with command. Within days, his notebook filled with scribbled formulas, flight graphs, and deflection angles was confiscated for security review. Officially, it was logged as experimental targeting data. Unofficially, some officers feared he'd uncovered something the Germans hadn't: a mental form of predictive computing. When the intelligence report came back from London, it carried a single line of warning: "Field application of Stirling's system may cause unsafe overconfidence in untrained personnel." Translation: it worked, but only for him. That night, Vance found Stirling sitting beside his stripped-down gun mount, cleaning each barrel by hand. "They think you're dangerous," Vance said. Stirling chuckled. "Good. That means they're paying attention." Vance shook his head. "No, Hawk. Not to the Germans. To us." The silence that followed said everything. Stirling's accuracy had gone from miracle to liability. Command didn't like outliers, and not ones who proved the manuals wrong. Yet, in the days that followed, something remarkable happened. Gunners across the base began whispering his techniques, counting prop revolutions, syncing bursts to climb rates, even sketching crude targeting triangles on the sides of their planes. The brass might have ignored his math. The men didn't. Every pilot wanted to be just a little bit more like the sniper who turned equations into kills. Stirling had started a quiet rebellion, not of bullets, but of thinking. June 20th, 1944. The 357th Fighter Group was ordered to sweep deep into German airspace near Leipzig. It was supposed to be a routine escort for the 8th Air Force bombers, but intelligence later revealed the Luftwaffe had set an ambush. 2 full wings of Me 109 seconds and FW 190 seconds waiting just beyond the bomber corridor. Vance and Stirling didn't know it yet, but they were flying straight into a trap. The sun glared over the horizon as the formation crossed into enemy territory. The radio hummed with routine chatter until it didn't. Bandits, 3 o'clock high. In less than 10 seconds, the sky erupted. Contrails twisted into knots, black smoke poured from engines, and tracer fire sliced the clouds like lightning. The Luftwaffe dove in coordinated waves. Their goal: isolate the escorts, then cut the bombers apart. Stirling's heart rate barely changed. He watched the chaos unfold with surgical calm. "They're hurting us," he muttered. Vance looked back. "What?" "They're not attacking. They're channeling." And he was right. The German fighters weren't shooting to kill. They were forcing the P-51 seconds into a narrow altitude band, where their climb rate dropped a perfect setup for the second wave of FW 190 seconds coming from above. Stirling's mind worked faster than the radio could. "Climb 10 degrees left now." Vance hesitated. "That's toward them." "Exactly. They'll overshoot." He'd calculated it mid-fight. The Me 109 seconds would dive at a relative speed of 420 miles per hour, unable to pull up in time if their prey turned into the attack instead of away. Vance yanked the stick. The P-51 rolled into a brutal climb just as a pair of German cannons opened fire. The tracers missed by inches. "Now cut throttle." 3 seconds, Stirling shouted. Vance chopped power, the sudden deceleration throwing both men forward. 2 Me 109 seconds screamed past them, overshooting wildly. Stirling squeezed the triggers. The guns barked once, twice short, perfect bursts. One Messerschmitt burst into flame mid-roll. The others spiraled out, trailing smoke. "Jesus Christ," Vance yelled. Stirling just grinned. Math's faster than fear. But the fight wasn't over. A third formation of FW 190 seconds was climbing fast from below, trying to catch the Mustangs before they could rejoin the bombers. Stirling leaned over the gun sight, squinting. "Hold steady," he whispered. "This one's about timing." He counted under his breath. 1, 2, 3. Then fired a split second before the Focke-Wulf appeared. Vance didn't even see the enemy yet. But the moment it broke through the clouds, it flew straight into the wall of tracers. A flash, a blossom of fire, and it was gone. Vance's voice cracked through the intercom. "You predicted him." Stirling's tone stayed calm, almost cold. He was flying the pattern. They all do. By the time they regrouped with the bombers, the sky was littered with falling wreckage. The Luftwaffe had lost 9 planes in that engagement. The 357th none. Back at base, ground crews counted the shell casings. Stirling had fired less than 200 rounds, less than 1 full burst for most gunners. Vance shook his head. "They came to hunt. You calculated their funeral." News of the encounter spread through the 8th Air Force like wildfire. Pilots called it the Leipzig Trick. Command called it unrepeatable. But every man in the 357th knew the truth. Stirling had turned the sky into a chessboard, and the Luftwaffe never saw the checkmate coming. That night, while the others celebrated, Stirling sat under the wing of Lucky Charm, cleaning the barrels with a rag. When Vance asked what he was thinking, he said, "They'll adapt. The math will have to change again." He wasn't boasting. He was preparing. The war of instinct had ended. The war of calculation had begun. August 1944, somewhere over eastern France. The clouds were thin, the light metallic. That strange silver glow before dusk. The 357th was running low on fuel after a bomber escort run when a desperate radio call came through. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Gold Flight 3. We're under attack. Request immediate cover." Vance turned to Stirling. "We're closest." They banked hard, fuel gauges near empty. Below them, 3 American B-17 seconds limped through flak bursts, chased by 6 Bf 109 seconds in perfect formation. Vance pushed the throttle until the Merlin engines screamed. Stirling studied his twin Brownings and muttered, "This is suicide math. At 25,000 feet, every move mattered. Air was thin, bullets curved in slow arcs, and one wrong calculation meant death." The P-51's dive brought them in from above and behind the Germans. Vance called out, "We've got maybe 20 seconds before they see us." "Then that's 19 seconds too long," Stirling replied. He lined up his sights, but this time the angle was impossible. The lead German fighter was banking away, nearly 45 degrees offline. Standard gunnery said you'd need to aim several plane lengths ahead and below the target. Stirling aimed behind it. Vance swore, "You're shooting the wrong way." Stirling fired. 3 short bursts. The tracers curved into the slipstream. Wind shear from the high-speed dive pulled them upward. And then, contact. The lead Messerschmitt exploded in a flash that blinded the other Germans. Vance froze. "How did you?" Stirling grinned faintly. "The prop wash lifted the rounds. The air's thinner up here. It bends the math." Before Vance could reply, 4 more BF 109 seconds peeled off and came for them. Stirling adjusted his seat, flipped the gun switches again, and said softly, each short, rhythmic burst was placed like punctuation in the sky. One German burst into fire. Another stalled, mid-turn. The last dove for the clouds, trailing smoke. But there was one left. The ace. Its nose bore a black spiral, a Me-109 flown by a Luftwaffe veteran named Oberleutnant Victor Hartmann, known for downing 6 Mustangs in a single day. Hartmann dove straight at them in a head-on pass. Vance shouted, "Break left!" Stirling said, "No, wait." He held fire until the German filled his sight picture. Closer, closer, until even Vance thought the collision was inevitable. Then Stirling fired 1 second before impact. Both planes streamed at a combined speed of nearly 800 miles per hour. For an instant, nothing. Then Vance saw it. Black smoke trailing from Hartmann's engine, his plane rolling over and disintegrating in midair. Stirling hadn't flinched. He hadn't blinked. He just watched the wreckage fall and whispered, "Perfect timing." When they landed, ground crews counted the holes over 30 inches their fuselage. 1 round had missed Stirling's head by less than an inch. Command logged the encounter as 5 confirmed kills in one engagement. But the legend spread faster than the ink could dry. They called it the shot that shouldn't have been possible. Engineers at Wright Field requested every note, every angle, every scrap of Stirling's ballistic calculations. They couldn't replicate them. The formulas didn't make sense, not on paper, because Stirling hadn't just been using math. He'd been feeling the numbers, the rhythm of the wind, the heartbeat of the plane, the muscle memory of a man who once hunted coyotes in Texas and now hunted ghosts in the sky. Vance told him that night, "They'll write books about you." Stirling just smiled. "Maybe, but they'll never believe it was real." When the war ended in 1945, Caleb Hawk Stirling didn't go home a hero. He didn't go home at all, not right away. He stayed behind in occupied Germany, assigned to technical debriefs for captured Luftwaffe officers. The brass wanted to know how the Germans had trained their aces, what targeting methods they used, how they planned their engagements. But every time Stirling sat in front of a German pilot, it was the same story. The men would glance at his service ribbons, then at his records, and fall silent. Some refused to speak. One finally muttered, "You are the one who shoots through time." Word of his reputation had spread. From the wreckage fields of Bremen to the airfields of Bavaria, he wasn't a man to them. He was a rumor that had killed too many of their friends. But the U.S. Army Air Forces didn't celebrate rumors. They wanted systems, numbers they could teach, formulas they could control. Stirling's notebook had vanished into an intelligence vault labeled Classified. Ballistic Lead Theory. Field Study 357G. His name didn't appear anywhere on the documents. When he returned to Texas in late '46, there were no parades, no interviews. He limped down from the train platform with a cane and a duffel bag the same way he'd left. Quiet, unseen, carrying secrets the war had no place for. For years, he worked as a crop duster, flying patched-up Pipers and rebuilt Stearmans across the plains. Locals called him the Old Flyer, never realizing he'd once turned physics into a weapon. He'd land his plane, wipe the dust from his goggles, and smile when kids asked, "Did you ever fly a Mustang?" "Once," he'd say. "She flew herself after that." But history doesn't stay buried forever. In 1953, a young Air Force engineer reviewing declassified combat reports came across the Leipzig engagement. 5 kills, 183 rounds fired, all confirmed. He tracked the pilot and gunner names of Vance and Stirling and tried to replicate their performance in simulation. It was impossible. Even modern computing couldn't model the lead time Stirling had achieved. The engineer filed a note. Subject's results exceed theoretical ballistic probability by 40%, suggest intuitive predictive capacity beyond measurable calculation. In plain English, he made the impossible real. The Air Force buried the report again. It didn't fit the narrative. The jet age was coming. Radar, computers, missiles. There was no room for one man's instinct, no matter how perfect his aim had been. But among old pilots, his legend lived on. They whispered about the gunner who could see seconds into the future. The man who fired 3 bullets and hit 4 planes. When Vance died in 1962, they found a letter in his personal box of war medals. It was addressed to no one, signed only V. It read, "They say the P-51 won the war. They're wrong. A ranch boy with a notebook did." And somewhere deep in the archives of the Air Force Museum lies a small metal case labeled Stirling, experimental data. Inside it, a handful of notes, some equations, and a quote scrawled in pencil across the last page. "Don't aim where they are. Aim where the war will be." Decades later, in 1981, an old P-51 Mustang sat rusting behind a county museum in Abilene, Texas. Its wings were pitted with age, its paint scorched by the sun. The tag on the fuselage simply read, P-51D, 357th Fighter Group, 8th Air Force. No one realized it was Lucky Charm. Every few years, a veteran would wander by and run a hand along the aluminum skin, tracing bullet scars still visible beneath the faded stars and bars. One of them, a former bomber crewman, whispered, "This one always came back." In the nearby town, Caleb Hawk Stirling lived in a small house near the airfield. His limp was worse now, his hands rough with oil and age, but he still flew. A crop duster rebuilt from junk, patched with aluminum and hope. He never talked about the war. When asked why he'd stopped shooting, he'd smile faintly and say, "Because there's nothing left to prove when the sky knows your name." But the sky did remember. In 1984, during an Air Force reunion, a young pilot approached him, clean-cut, full of pride. "Sir, they told us about you, said you could shoot through time." Stirling laughed, the sound gravelly but warm. "Nah, I just listened to what the wind was already saying." The pilot hesitated, then asked, "Is it true? 5 kills with 1 burst." Stirling's eyes drifted to the horizon, the endless Texas blue he'd once ruled. "The math doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that we came home." That night, under a wide amber sunset, he walked to the old museum yard. The gate was locked, but he climbed it anyway, cane in hand. He touched the cold metal of Lucky Charm one last time. The propeller blade still bore faint dents, echoes of flak and fury from a lifetime ago. He rested his hand on the wing, closed his eyes, and whispered, "Still flying." 2 months later, the museum staff found a folded piece of paper taped to the fuselage. On it, a single handwritten note, "Every man calculates in war. I just listened longer. C.S. 357th FG." Today, aviation historians still debate his story. Some call him myth. Some call him proof that human instinct can defy math itself. But among those who know the gunners, the engineers, the dreamers. Stirling's name carries a different meaning. He was the man who looked at chaos and found pattern, who turned war into an equation and won by trusting the invisible lines that others refused to see. The sky may have forgotten his uniform, but it never forgot his aim.